Welcome to Tracing Your Family Roots. I'm Chuck Mason, and with me this morning is Janelle Blue, and our guest is Sharon Hodges, who has been a frequent guest of the show in the past. And today we're going to talk about something we've talked about before. Again, it's something that you could talk over and over again about. It's avoiding mistakes. And Sharon and I share a pet peeve, I found out.
And we're not the only ones.
That's true. That's taking information. The internet has opened up so much to us, and people put things up on there, but taking that information, accepting it as gospel, and running with it, and not bothering to check it out and make sure that it's accurate. So Sharon?
Yeah, there's a lot. I love the one where you'll get somebody, the father died at a certain year and the mother is having a child 20 years later. And you see that copied over and over and over again. And I'm hoping that the person who originally put it up just did a typographical error and didn't proof it. Because otherwise, Mom, I'm sorry, I feel sorry for you. But what I don't understand is, if you're going to use family trees, and you should, I mean, they're good clues, they've got some good hints, some of them have excellent information, but before you just copy it and put it into your tree, check what's on there. We've got an example, if we can find it. This came from someone who put up an old family search family tree, and I'm talking about an old one, several iterations back. And they took the 1880 census, and I don't know if we can find it, we've got an example somewhere, but the 1880 census for Morris County, New Jersey has my second great-grandfather, Benjamin Long, his wife, Anna Mariah, and 5 children, all of who have the surname of Long. And the person who put up this old family tree ended up taking that 1880 census, which you would do, and say, okay, here are the children, I'm going to put them up there. But there was only one problem. 3 of those children were not the children of the head of the household. Anna Mariah, the wife, had been married prior to the time she married Benjamin Long. And these children were his stepchildren, not his regular children. But for some reason, the census taker, however the questions were asked, those kids got all the same, and it says son, daughter, when they should have actually had stepson or stepdaughter. Had the person who put this up on the family tree done their entire research on this family, they would have realized there's a mistake here. So if you try to track those 3 children down, and bring them back farther, or look for records for them, for a marriage record, or if they didn't get married, a death record, you're not going to find it because they all have the wrong surname.
And
I've seen it copied onto other trees.
Yeah. And we often see this. I've seen it a number of times with families in my line, and what I don't understand is, did the census taker just assume, did he or she not ask what the surnames were, or did the person giving the information not bother to distinguish that these are stepchildren?
Right.
A good suggestion for taking information off of those family trees would be to look for that one entry that has the most evidence, that, you know, where they've really gotten some original documents and they've put that in the family tree. That's the one to look at.
That is.
And of course, one of the problems that we have with some of the commercial websites is when you are doing research and you find documents, then it will suggest other documents that may be related. And what particularly beginners need to understand is there's some criteria that matches with what they're looking at. I have a distant cousin who found my grandmother, who was the head of the household in the 1940 census, with my mother and her siblings. And when you get into researching, up pops another Mabel Peyton in New York with 5 children. Well, this distant cousin has assumed that this is one and the same person. She didn't look at, my grandmother was born in Pennsylvania, my mother and her siblings were born in New Jersey, this woman and all her children were born in New York. You know, so
And the children's names weren't necessarily the same.
They were definitely different. And to further complicate things, my mother's oldest brother, who by 1940 was out head of the household, had 2 or 3 children of his own, had a middle initial A for Aird, his grandmother's maiden name. But Archie was the oldest child in the New York household. So she has assumed my uncle's middle name is Archie, even though, you know, it's obvious from age, you know, they're 8 or 10 years apart, that this is not one and the same person. So, you know, we do have to do complete research too when we're doing this. We can't rely on just 1 or 2 documents.
No, I like to tell people, I try to get at least 3 documents that will confirm everything that I'm looking for about a person. But I was doing, if you just take 1 document, take a death record. Now, of all the 3 vital records, birth, marriage, and death has more errors on it than the rest. I mean, the person who gives the information could have been a friend, didn't know, was a distraught, you know, all upset because the person wasn't expected to die. It was an accident. So, I mean, my own cousin put the wrong name of our grandfather on a death record. And
Mine too.
Okay, she knows better. I know she knows better. But I've got one for my great-grandmother, my father's grandmother, for Carrie Fuller. And if we can get it up on the screen, I don't know. But in looking at this death record, the informant was a woman by the name of Hattie Terry. Now, always check out the informant. Turns out Hattie was the eldest child, daughter of the deceased, of Carrie Fuller. When you look at the death record, it has on there, you know, where she died, what she died of, which would all be perfectly, at least I hope the doctor knows where she was and what she died of. But all of that seemed fine, and it said, you know, where she was buried is perfectly correct. That's on there. That's right. But then and her date of death is correct. No problem there. But then you get her date of birth, and it's wrong. And the only way you'll know it's wrong is by getting other records that will help you prove it. Well, it is the month, the day, the year, totally wrong. So when they give you, she's how many years old, how many months old, how many days old? Well, of course, that's wrong. And then she gave the name of the father. Now, I have to give Hattie a little credit here. She may not have known because Carrie's mother, my second great-grandmother, well, she lied on every single document she had. So I'm not sure that Hattie even knew who her grandparents would have been. But she has down there the name of her mother's father as being Benjamin Fuller. Now, Carrie was married when she died. She was married to a Fuller. So unless her maiden name was Fuller, her father's name isn't going to be Fuller. Okay, the clerk just, what's her father's name? Benjamin. And he looks at the death certificate. Okay, that's Fuller. He just writes Fuller down. Fine. Well, her father wasn't a Benjamin. That was her mother's first husband, who died 10 years before Carrie was even born. So if you don't know that, and he was born in New York, which is totally incorrect. So I have to admit, this was years ago I found this. I had been looking for this Benjamin character in all sorts of census records and other records, obviously never found him. It's because the name was wrong. Her mother's name was correct on it. Didn't know where she was born. So everything that was really important that you needed to get back to the next generation was wrong on that death certificate. And had you just relied on that death certificate, you would be spinning your wheels. You would never have any idea of where to go look.
And I've had the same experience. The father of my great-grandfather that has never been named anywhere. The only place was on that death certificate where the grandson named him incorrectly. And all the indirect evidence says that it was a different person. Yeah. And I've been trying to prove against that for a long time. And
I like to use my two grandfathers' death certificates. My mother's father says my grandfather's father was John D. Payton. I don't know where my uncle got that from, because as far back as I can remember, and some of my cousins, not all of them live close to my grandfather to hear the story, but others of my cousins who lived within the area and saw him often all knew that he was named after his father, Alexander, not John D. And then my father's death certificate, everything on there down to the little town in Essex County, New Jersey that he was born in is 100% correct. And the informant was my grandfather's daughter, my aunt's husband. So obviously he knew all the information. He may have gotten it from my aunt. I don't know. And then I have a great-grandfather's death certificate that my great-grandmother, Mary, is also listed as my great-grandfather's mother. The father is unknown, and I understand that because my great-grandfather's father died when my great-grandfather was 8 years old. So my great-grandmother certainly didn't know his father, but certainly knew his mother back in Scotland before they came to the United States. So you just never know what.
And that goes back to what you were saying. Do complete research. Not only did I have problems with Carrie Fuller's death record, my great-grandmother, but her husband, my great-grandfather, got his death record from Mount Vernon, New York. And it was a transcription of the record. It was not a photocopy or anything. And I actually called back to the clerk and said, could you please verify that you gave me the right information? Because they did it in like a letter form. So it had NRA, date of death, June 3rd or June 6th, 1897. And then when you got to the body of the letter where they actually copied everything, it said June 23rd. I'm like, okay, something's wrong here. Right there was a red flag, because on the same document you had two different dates. Meanwhile, I had, because it's a part of this came from the Mayflower, so here I had a compiled genealogy that said he died December 23rd, 1897. Kind of compiled genealogies. It had no source. I'm like, so here I've got conflict again. So I looked up and asked for where they were buried. I asked for, from the cemetery, can you tell me who's in the plot and give me information? Now, that's fine, but you've got to make sure what they're giving you is either the date of death or the date of burial. You need to know which one. Came back that same December 23rd, just like the compiled genealogy. Said, okay, I want something more. And I wrote the library, the public library, because this was years ago. Paper was not online. I'm not even sure it still is. And they sent me the obituary that said he died December 23rd, 1897. I'm like, okay, the death record is totally wrong, because I know if he died in December, you may have held him to June if the ground was frozen. But if he died in June, you didn't wait till December to bury him. So be very careful. Double check everything that you've got. No matter, I had a red flag, but no matter what you get, double check it. Try to get at least 3 things that will tell you. That's just my theory, 3 things. Other people will tell you 2 is enough, whatever. But try to triple check what you've got.
And another problem, and this goes into something with the vital records too, is abstracts and transcriptions of records. And
they're wonderful, because if you see a book that's has abstracts of marriage records or whatever, it lets you know, hey, there is a record out there. This person got it from someplace. Now, I've heard people say, well, where'd they get it from? Try reading the introduction. It usually tells you. We went to this repository, and it was this microfilm, etc. And the one thing about abstracts is the person who did the abstracting put in what they think is important, and that's not necessarily what you think is important. And transcriptions, how many times have you transcribed something, you've gotten home, you've gone to read your handwriting, and you went, was that a 3 or a 5? Was that an A or an O? You make errors when you transcribe things. And people try to, if they see an error in a document when they're transcribing, they want to change it. don't. It's supposed to be the way it was if you're going to transcribe it.
You know, that's one of the things that I have found in Gloucester County Historical Society. They have created index cards to births, deaths, and marriages, but particularly the deaths. They'll take the information out of the obituaries, and different people have done this over time. So sometimes you will just see the next of kin, the wife, the husband, whoever listed. And you go back to the newspaper and there are all the children, maybe even grandchildren
And
listed.
locations.
And locations and things like that. And this also goes back to the certificates that we were talking about. Depending on how the state handles a certificate when you request one, in some cases you get a photocopy and it is listed there at the bottom that it's a true and accurate copy and certified. And then you have states where they will copy the information onto a form and certify it. And one of the things that I've seen in the past was 3 different death certificates, I believe it was, that every one of them had one item that was different from the other 2. So there again, you have to go back to the original to look at that and know that they copied it accurately.
And you can lose so much information because an abstract only takes certain things. One of my favorites is it's the name of the wife, the name of the husband, and then supposedly the marriage date. And that was what you got. Okay, fine. I know there's a record. But if I had stopped with that abstract and used the marriage date that was in that abstract, I would have been totally wrong. When I went to the Fairfax County Archives and pulled out the actual marriage record, they had taken the date the marriage license was issued, which very often back then was the date of marriage. Mm-hmm. But in this case, it was not. They married like 3 days later, but in the middle of this marriage license was where they were born, whether they had been married before, the name of the parents, all of this stuff you would want to know. And you just miss that. So don't overlook using those books. They're wonderful because they do tell you, yes, there is a record here. Here is where you go find it. Go find it and get the rest of the information.
Another possibility could have been the date that it was actually recorded rather than the date of the license or the date of the marriage. I've seen that too. We also need to understand the terminology in documents. I often say to students when I'm teaching, go to a law dictionary, look up the term, because you may understand part of it, but you may not understand the total meaning. One of them being the term orphan. I early on thought I knew everything about it. Well, when you look at the legal term, it is anybody who has lost a parent, not both parents, a parent, can be any age. So at 40-something when my parents died, I became an orphan.
You did. Well, also my favorite, I mean, we talk about junior and senior a lot, but my favorite is son-in-law versus stepson. And this is something I ran into not long ago. Got a copy of a will, a lady by the name of Mary Boyer. Did this for a client. And in her will, she leaves her son, John Boyer. If you look at the abstract, she left him all of her potter's tools. Well, when you go get the original, she left him all of her hatter's tools. Really different occupations. But when you get, then she marries, and you find her husband's will. His name was Richard Hopwood, and he is leaving to his son-in-law, John Boyer, different spelling, but doing the sounding, and he says what he's leaving him. So I'm looking online at some point, and they have these messages back and forth, and say, well, look, Richard had a son, John, had a daughter because she married this son, John, this guy, John Boyer, and we're like, no. Sometimes when you see son-in-law, they're referring to stepson. And you've got to get the entire picture. So you had to take those two wills together and realize, because Richard only had one son, and he married somebody totally different. So you've got to really watch it.
And I have an example of that too with a very early 1700s will where it names the person's children, John Houston's children. He has no son named John Houston, but he's leaving money to John Houston Jr. And finally I figured out that that was a nephew.
Right. Same name, different, same area, same time frame. So the only way they could delineate was he was the older one and the other one was the younger one. So they became junior and senior.
And that was quite common early on. You know, it's also, you get into cousins and niece and nephew and things like that. These terms were often interchangeable for males and females, were often used for not just cousins, but nieces and nephews, grandchildren. You know, there's a whole list of terminology that was early on used that we have to really understand the whole dynamics of things before we really get things correct. Another problem is using the date of probate of a will
this is one of my
for the
favorite.
date of death.
You look at something that, oh, where did they get that date of death? Maybe they had a Bible record or something. You get really excited because this person has this date of death back from the 1700s, you know, and you want to know where they got it from. You go and find there's a will, and it's the date that the will was probated. Now, I'm sorry, people, but the guy didn't kick off early that morning, and they didn't run straight to the courthouse to file his will. You know, and there could be years between the time the will was written and the time it was probated, and the guy could have died any time in between those two. 2 days after he wrote it, 6 years after he wrote it. It just depends on when did the court meet. They very often met terms, so maybe they only met 4 times, you know, 4 terms a year or every other month. How far away was this family from the courthouse? I think back to when Loudoun County was still part of Fairfax County. And if you lived on the western end of Loudoun County at that time, and the courthouse was over here in Fairfax County, that wasn't a trip that you could just drop everything and go make. I've got to bring the cattle in, I've got to get the crop in, you know, you've got to do all these. Oh, well, it's winter, the roads are bad. It could have been a year or more before they finally got in there to probate the will. So do not use the dates between, you know, it was written this date, it was probated this date, or if there's no will, okay, here's when the bond was appointed for the administrator, so he died before that date, but look, he signed a deed here, so you've got between, you know, those 2 time frames. Don't use the date of probate as the date of death.
One of the other things under probate law, there are laws on the books as to how long after the death you can do something with the probate. I found out when my uncle died that in New Jersey, the law is you cannot present a will for probate until the person's been dead for 11 days. Now that was in 2004, and I said to the clerk, why 11 days? Why not 10? Why not 2 weeks? You know, that's what the legislature decided.
Yeah, I saw one that said the guy had been dead at least 50 days prior to, and that's probably the only time they could then go do this. But one other thing to do real quickly, because I know we're going to run out of time, when we're on some of these subscription databases, you'll see they don't have an image of a document, but they'll take like an abstract. Please don't stop there. I've got one where I had the original document, and one of the things, it was an abstract from a newspaper, Death of a Child, and the abstract of the newspaper actually gave you the name of the child's father. Very handy if you want to go back a generation. But when you see this abstracted on this database, everything is there except the name of the father. So you're missing really something very important. So if all you're getting is where it says no image available, read the source. Where did it come from? Where can you go find that original so you can get what is not there?
We're getting close to being out of time, and the one thing that we do want to emphasize before we go is that everything is not online, and also what is online can be incorrect, can be incomplete.
So do your complete research on this and cite your sources. No matter what you do, cite your
The
sources.
source citation is so important because that takes you back to where the person has gotten the information. And I tell my students, whenever you are looking at anything online, you want to look for that source citation. And you don't just want to look at that source citation, you want to go back to that document and verify what it says in what you're looking at to make sure that, source citation can take you back to something, but it doesn't mean they have put correct information in what
Right.
they have put
They
together.
could have misread something. It could be a secondary source, so you have to go back to the primary. And if you're going to find documents, you've got to know your boundaries. If you don't follow your boundaries, you're going to go look in the wrong place.
Well, and just doing source citation is just very efficient too, because you put that aside and then you want to go back and try to figure out where did I get that, and so.
And having done this for so long, I have some old stuff that I didn't have any idea I was supposed to do that, and I go, where did I get that?
Get that. Yes, I have a file folder of those kinds of things that, because early on, my instructor never said anything about a source citation. I kind of learned at the School of Hard Knocks.
And of course, that's the thing now that you were really looking for and you want to find it again.
Going back, searching 6 months for that book of cemetery transcriptions that I was positive I knew what book it was, where it was, and they move things in the library on
I hate it when they do that, when you want to just walk to the shelf and it's not there.
Well, Sharon, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. This is a topic that, like I said at the beginning, we could do over and over again because there are always new things coming up that cause us to make mistakes.
Yes.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
So we'll just sit here and pretend that we're sitting. Oh, he's going.